Hey everyone, welcome to Recombinant Teaching. I'm your host, Justin Schaefer, and on this show, I'm holding STEM education office hours where I'll unpack your questions on STEM pedagogy, student success, academic careers, and everything in between. I've taught about 10,000 students in my 13 career, and just like you, I've spent countless hours in the trenches working with students, helping them learn how to succeed in college and beyond. Through hosting this show, I hope that we can learn from each other, solve some problems, share some tips and advice, and ultimately improve STEM education together. If you have a question you'd like me to tackle, check out my website on the show notes and click the Submit a Question link. Whether you want to write in, send an audio clip, or join me live, I'd love to have you be a part of the show. All right, so let's get going today. And today we have a guest from Illinois, Christin Monroe. So welcome, Christin. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us what you're up to.
Thanks, Justin. So I just started as an educational research associate for the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning here at the University of Illinois, and I'm really excited to expand my education research.
Okay, great. And you do have a chemistry background too. So can you tell us a little bit about the courses you used to teach in chemistry and maybe some of the chem ed that you've been involved with?
Sure. So I used to teach at Landmark College, which is in southern Vermont. Landmark is one of two colleges in the country that exclusively serve neurodivergent students. And so I taught all levels of chemistry that were offered at Landmark, all from Gen Chem for both majors and non-majors, all the way up through organic biochemistry and then some other chemistry electives. So I taught a lot of different courses at Landmark.
Great.
And I was interested in developing and modifying content to support the students at the college.
Well, awesome. So not only do you know your chemistry, but you know how to tailor and modify things for your students' population, specifically neurodivergent, like you said. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. There's two, let alone one, universities that specialize for neurodivergent students. As many of our schools, and mine's included, we're seeing increasing numbers of neurodivergent students, and we do want to make sure we tailor our approaches to, not only have all students succeed, but, groups like neurodivergent students too. So great. I'm really glad. That's a really interesting background. So maybe I can answer your question too, if it's related to that or something else. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so my question is related to that,
All right.
which is what advice do you have, especially in modifying courses to implement structure to help support neurodivergent students? What have you found works really well with that population?
That's a really good question, and again, a really important one. But maybe I could kick it back to you real quick. Can you tell us maybe what's your or maybe Landmark's definition of neurodivergent students? Because I find a lot of conflicting kind of resources or definitions, and therefore, who quote unquote counts or not, and how do you so that will help inform my answer, I think, for how you tailor that. So thanks for providing that context.
Thank you for clarifying that. That is a really important question. So at Landmark, we mainly serve students that have autism, ADHD, other dyslexia, and other types of learning differences. And generally speaking, when we talk about neurodivergent, we're really talking about students that fall both above and below the bell curve when it comes to their skills and abilities. But specifically, those are the populations that we tend to see at Landmark.
Okay. And we're going to talk more about maybe what goes on with the course itself, not necessarily maybe testing accommodations and things like that. Is that correct?
Correct. I'm thinking more of the course policies or modifications that you could make to maybe minimize the need for individualized accommodations.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, and I'm not an expert in this space, just to say that up front, but, and I have had some cases where students have approached me and said, hey, I'm falling in this camp of ADHD or neurodivergent more broadly, and can you accommodate me? So like you said, try to avoid those individual cases, because that is something you could do, right? I mean, you could design your course in a way that you think is going to be accessible, but there might be some cases where a student says, hey, can you do some extra accommodations? So it's just one specific example of that. I had a case where I do a project for my anatomy and physiology course, which is about health and wellness. So basically students have to pick an idea that they're going to do something to help make themselves better, right? So that could be mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever they want to do. They come up with an intervention and then they track it over the course of the semester and collect data. So an example that one student wanted to increase their upper body strength. So they started doing pull-ups and they could do 0. at the beginning of the semester. But through weight training, through other interventions with diet and exercise and sleep, by the end of the semester, they could do 10 pull-ups. So pretty cool, right? They can actually track that. And then here's where, tying into your question, the take-home assignment at the very end was to create a one-page flyer on Canva or PowerPoint or whatever to kind of showcase the data they collected and what they learned and how it tied into A&P. And they could do whatever they want, right? So make it as creative as possible. So I had a student approach me that said, they actually felt really uncomfortable based on that assignment because of the freedom. It was just too wide open and they couldn't focus and they couldn't come up with an idea of how to present it. And they asked me, can I just write a 2-page paper instead? More traditional output, because that's what they felt more capable of doing. And they told me they got really anxious with trying to do this otherwise. And I said, of course, that's totally fine. So is that a way that you can make an individual accommodation? Yes. But what I've done since then is I just made the assignment basically do whatever you want. And so this is kind of going to a broader answer now of thinking about flexibility, thinking about and again, I'm not an expert in this area, but many of you might know about universal design for learning, right? So UDL, this is a area that goes back many years, if not decades at this point, right? Where you can basically design a course such that there's a lot of flexibility built in. There's a lot of adaptability in terms of assignments and types of assignments, and therefore students have some choice based on whatever. It doesn't have to be neurodivergent, right? But it's just going to allow students to be able to succeed in any way, shape, or form. So with this assignment that I came up with again, okay, now you can make the flyer, which I like because I think it's a really creative way to show this. But if you don't want to do that for whatever reason, you can write a 2-page paper. You can make a 2-minute YouTube video. You can do whatever you want as long as you can showcase me the output of your project in a way that we can assess. Did you do it or not? And then did you meet the learning objectives or not? So again, kind of being flexible with assignments like that could be one way to do it. So does that sound like something that you've done before too, Christin? And am I on the right track with that answer?
Absolutely. I mean, I love what you said about alignment with the learning objectives and kind of thinking about the flexibility that you can build in. And it is interesting, though, that sometimes flexibility is good, but then other times the students start to overthink it and then it kind of backfires. So your example is so great because it shows that balance and the need for balancing flexibility while also attuning to individual students.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate the endorsement there. Yeah, as I'm not trained in this space, as many faculty I'm sure are not, and they're still learning. Like, even look at me, I had to ask you, can you give me the definition, because it's still a kind of an evolving space. So good. So I'm glad that kind of flexibility can be helpful, but also, to help students kind of zone in on a certain area without feeling overwhelmed by that freedom, perhaps. Another way maybe that course structure could be adopted or adapted for neurodivergent students specifically could be with the structure itself, right? So when I teach with this high structure course design model, we have pretty, prescribed expectations in terms of what happens before class, what happens during class, what happens after class. It's very repeatable. It's pretty much calendared to the date, like exactly what's coming all the time. There's no pop quizzes. So, and I have had many students tell me that they really appreciate that structure because, again, they know what's coming. They know in advance. It's all of it's posted very early. They can work on it as they need, and there's no surprises. And I'm not sure if the students that tell me that are telling that because of they have something like ADHD or not, or because they just appreciate kind of, again, a model to work through that works. But I've got a lot of positive feedback on that. So is that something else that could be useful for the neurodivergent student population, having like kind of structured assignments and very well laid out outcomes?
Yeah. So many, not all students that are neurodivergent can struggle with executive function challenges, which range anywhere from getting started. I always tell people that some of the students I've worked with have a high activation energy. People that have science backgrounds are going to get that.
Yep.
Others won't.
Yep.
But then it's also the process going through the assignment, and students can also struggle with cognitive load. They say that we can only hold about 4 things in our head at the same time. So if and that may be different for a neurodivergent student. It might be less. So if the student is trying to figure out what's happening for the day and they have to put cognitive load towards that, then they're not able to focus on the course content and the learning outcomes. And so giving them that predictability, at least in my opinion, is something that can really help them to, if not be successful, enable them to be as successful as they can, because they're able to focus on some of the really, I mean, you and I both have taught some really hard classes, and we probably both share this philosophy of we want to make sure that the students are engaging with the content as much as possible and not distracted by some of the other things that come along with being a student.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. That cognitive load, that activation energy analogy is perfect there, right? Because if you try to just be transparent, right? Be straightforward, and that's going to support everybody. And I always tell my students, I want to know what you know, not what you think I want you to know, right? So let's not guess. Let's just be clear and set up those expectations and support our students however we can. So no, I love that. And just as we wrap up here, maybe do you have any resources that you'd like to share with faculty like myself? Because I'm learning a lot from this conversation. Thank you for challenging me with the new idea. I mean, not new, I know about this and I think about it, but I'm not, again, skilled in this space. So maybe some resources you can mention we can put in the show notes for people to follow up on.
Sure. So I think that for me, learning about executive function challenges, one of the defaults I look to is Brown's model of executive function, which was originally developed for students with ADHD, but I think it's actually more broadly applicable. And I actually also think that it is something that is useful for many students. I think that it's broadly applicable, but gaining a basic understanding of executive function challenges can be helpful, because it can help you to unpack where the student's getting stuck in the process. Because sometimes the students that aren't turning in work, it's a lot more complicated than, the classic, my dog ate my homework. Yeah. So being able to figure that out, I always encourage faculty to learn more about that.
Okay, awesome. So Brown's model of executive function, I will definitely look more into that myself, and we'll put a link in the notes, and maybe we'll find some guides from either your teaching learning center at Illinois or others that we can also link to get people some more actionable resources.
I know Landmark has a flyer about executive functions that is freely available on their website. So I would link to that.
Absolutely. Oh, great. Okay, everybody. So make sure you check those notes after for some more resources too. All right. And thank you, Christin. So I hope I was able to offer a little bit and from my point of view on how to do this, but you clearly have thought a lot about this, and we value your expertise in this area too. So thanks everybody for listening. That's another episode of Recombinant Teaching. If you want to be a part of the show, check out the show notes for the link, and check out my website if you'd like to learn more how I can work with you, your department, or your institution to improve STEM education. Thanks for listening, and happy teaching.